Hi everyone. Welcome to this sixth episode in the Careering Ahead series of webinars. This one's focused on solutions and finding the right solution. I think before this we've had a variety of different sessions that are on things like the right timing to be a consultant, what the legal ops manager role looks like. And other things that you can see with a shameless plug for our YouTube channel, Legal Ops Career. So with this one is about finding the right solution. This is kind of the bread and butter, I suppose, for legal ops professionals who are undoubtedly focused on problem solving as one of their key skills. So with this one, we're going to dive into a number of different aspects, some that are tech related, some that are not tech related at all, that maybe don't get the coverage that they should do. But I suppose without further ado, I will introduce to everybody and to the people that look at this afterwards, our panel for today. So I suppose if we go round everybody, let us know what you do and what you enjoy about it. So if I start with you, Kathrin.
Hi, yeah, I'm Kathrin. I'm a senior legal technologist at Penningtons, Manches, where I'm responsible for our legal tech strategy, making sure that we find the right solution for the right problems, and work with our fee earning teams to make sure they get equipped for what they are trying to achieve.
Excellent. And Lucia?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I am the delivery lead in the Fusion team at Wentzel. So Fusion is a legal tech and innovation team within the firm. I focus on optimizing legal service delivery and implementing process improvements across the firm, legal technology implementation, flexible resourcing solutions, both for clients or external facing matters, as well as for business improvements initiatives within the firm. So yeah, I really enjoy my role in terms of the problem solving aspects, taking really complex legal operational challenges and finding practical solutions that actually work for clients and teams. And in some ways, bridging the gap between legal practice and technology. As we know, lawyers and IT teams don't speak the same language, so having someone in the middle can be quite useful. And I particularly enjoy the collaborative aspects of this role. So working with lawyers to understand their pain points and then designing solutions that improve their daily work experience, or even give them those eureka moments where they go, yes, I don't have to do this anymore, or I can do it faster. So that's me.
Thanks, Lucia. And Tanisha?
Thanks, Marc. Hey, everyone. I'm Tanisha Minev. I'm Global Legal Counsel for DocPlanner. DocPlanner is a SaaS company that provides really cool, innovative solutions to doctors' clinics and booking services for patients. And I have a really unique role as part of the global legal team, involved in more complex and strategic role and product rollouts for our global operations. But I also am really closely involved in legal operations and how we improve our processes and working with the business and each other, which is a really strong interest of mine. I love looking at those problems that Lucia mentioned. I think you'd be great on the other side. We could have great conversations. And finding fixes for those challenges, both internally and with our business stakeholders, and seeing them come to life is probably the best part of my job.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So I guess if we start, almost from the beginning, and how you actually get the problem in the first place, what the problem that you need to find the right solution for. So how, maybe let's start with Lucia first. So how do you typically receive or find a problem to solve?
Yeah, it's a great question. So they typically come through to me via multiple channels. sometimes direct requests from fee earners, so our lawyers and associates within the firm. Maybe they're struggling with inefficient processes, or they've got budgetary constraints on matters, which is often the case now with in-house teams squeezing us on our fees. But I also discover them through user feedback. Sometimes if we implement a tool, someone will come back to me with an additional issue. Looking at how people actually work in practice versus how our systems expect them to work. So I might be on a call and someone's sharing their screen and showing me something, and I realize in the way that they're doing it that there could be an efficiency or a better solution there. But I'm also quite proactive in identifying those issues by analyzing our workflow bottlenecks and also on resourcing allocation patterns, because I am responsible for resource allocation within the team. And then the last is probably tech adoption metrics. So, analyzing our tech, who's using the tech, who's not. That often reveals where current solutions aren't actually meeting user needs, and investigating that and trying to then obviously solve for that problem.
That makes sense. And Kathrin, how do they come to you?
Well, they similar in some parts to what Lucia described. They come to me through direct requests and by monitoring adoption. But I wish sometimes my users would start with a problem rather than requesting something they have seen somewhere. So more often than not, I don't actually get faced with a problem in the first instance, but rather with a wish list either of a specific product they've seen or something they have dreamed up that they want to do without any success metric attached to it. So it is sometimes the first instance is just trying to find out, for me, is trying to find out what the problem actually is they want to solve, and trying to get everyone to sit down and formulate a problem statement as a starting point, rather than have an incoherent wish list of things without a route to how to solve that.
Sure. And Tanisha?
I think I am the problem. So I think very often it's of course, because I am an in-house legal counsel, I'm following workflows and processes that aren't always the most efficient. And I'm always looking for ways to improve the way that we work, with each other, and also just being faster, right? As an in-house counsel, great emphasis is placed on how quickly we turn around matters or how efficiently we can serve our business while also maintaining quality. So that's a unique problem that we need to solve. So it's really, I want to say, an internal problem, and it's just identifying those problems or challenges with our processes that we follow day to day and how we can improve those processes and create efficiency.
Okay. I'm sure you're not the problem, but we can dive into this in a little bit in a sec. So when you have your problem, so let's go back to Lucia again. When you have your problem, when you, I suppose, either see it on a screen share or they come to you, I suppose what is your approach to figuring out how to solve that problem? I suppose this is a bit more of a process, a mindset sort of question. I suppose each and every person has their own ways of problem solving, and I suppose this question kind of gets maybe to the nub of different mindsets and ways of thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it can be quite overwhelming because sometimes your brain tries to go directly to solutions, that tool that you know of, or that person, or that process. But I try to take a step back, make sure I'm defining the problem thoroughly. So understanding not just the symptoms of what they're experiencing in the issue, but actually the root cause, because often someone will say, this is happening, this is the issue. And when I do a little bit of interviewing and understanding, it turns out that something earlier on in the process is actually the root cause of the problem. So where do the pain points actually start occurring? Involving your stakeholders in that analysis, absolutely pivotal, because otherwise you're not solving the right problem. You're doing it in a vacuum on your own with maybe a little bit of information. So if you're finding that you're not able to actually understand the environment or the system in its full entirety, to go back to that stakeholder and say, can I just have a call just to clarify my thinking, or what this issue actually is. And then I consider the full spectrum of solutions. So process change, alternative resourcing or resource gearing, tech, sometimes it's organizational restructuring. And then I always pilot that solution on a small scale, giving the stakeholder like a sample output before full implementation, and then considering the best impact of the solution. So, often that impact on business itself. So take time to understand the commercial impact of the problem and actually what the return of investment actually is on the solution. Because if you don't have that commercial lens or that business lens, you could be using a Ferrari to solve a problem where, a city golf will be absolutely fine. And then collaboration. That's probably going to come up a lot in my answers, but collaboration with other departments, absolutely essential to make sure that your solutions work with that broader business context, whether it's, again, internal teams within the firm or directly with clients.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I think in the UK we have this, you shouldn't use a hammer to crack a nut analogy. But Kathrin, you said about people in effect coming to you with the solution to their problem. How do you, I guess, dial back and kind of get them to look at the root cause?
Yeah, I have a template for problem statement that I usually hand over to them and ask them to think about it and kind of like fill that template to make sure that they really, if it's really a problem or if it's just a want rather than a need. To be fair, probably around 80% of requests end at this stage because there isn't really a problem to solve, or the pain point hasn't become pressing enough to spend time on that. Out of the problem statements that come through, I then like to just have a think about how we can best solve that solution, ideally without having a specific solution in mind or without being too solution focused. And one thing that I've learned is to kind of map out every possible area of work this touches. So not only within the team, but also from supporting functions, as I've seen far too many times that seemingly unrelated process, for example, in the finance team is forgotten, but that completely changes the way we do things. Lucia mentioned how to measure then ROI and kind of make sure what that looks like. And this is something we strongly encourage our teams as well, especially when it comes to how this impacts the way we price our work, is this something that then warrants to be priced in for the client, or is this something that that whatever technology solution we get is something that will be carried wholly by the firm. So these are all things that we try to think ideally before looking at possible solutions, but at least in parallel when looking then what is out there that could help us solve that and put that new process or product into place.
Mm-hmm. And Tanisha, I guess you're unique in that you have you're almost two sides of the coin, right? You're both at the coalface doing the legal work, but you understand what solutions are out there.
Yeah, and I think it provides a little bit of a unique insight in that I get to see the actual impact of that. It's not improvement for improvement's sake or process for process sake. So a couple of levels to it. Of course, if it's a process or a problem that, the already exists, and how do we improve that, and how do we make sure that we're continuously improving that as we grow, as we scale, as things change. If it's something that doesn't exist and we demonstrate a need for that. So if we're looking at the data, so for me, in my current role, we have lawyers in country, over 13 countries. So I think there's more than 30 of us. So if there's one lawyer that is experiencing a problem probably not worth investing time in improving that or looking at solutions that are going to affect other legal counsels that maybe aren't facing similar issues. So firstly, looking at the data and whether it's a real problem, that it's significant enough that warrants the effort that would go into whatever solution that is, whether it's internal build or external automation and so on. And also just looking at how we can standardize things. So if it doesn't exist, we need to map out what the process currently looks like, what the challenge is. We refer to this as a T1 document. So really looking at where we are and where we want to go, and how do we get there, what our ideal state is. And sometimes that really is just standardizing a process and documenting it somewhere so that everybody knows how, when, why, who's responsible, that kind of stuff before we go to anything else. I like to think of it as focusing on people and the process before we even get to technology, because I think those are the things that are often overlooked, or they come later, right? When we want people to buy into the cool automation or technology, then we focus on the people rather than getting their buy-in, understanding their needs and what the effectiveness is going to be upfront. So really mapping out all of that before we move forward with anything else.
Okay. People and process is a great segue towards my next question. So I guess for the people watching this webinar and I guess watching later, I'm sure you've all been on LinkedIn and seen multiple posts from legal tech vendors saying that they are always the right solution. They are the solution. But I suppose it can't always be the right solution. So I suppose when is the solution not a tech solution, I guess. And maybe if I may start with Tanisha first then.
So probably the first challenge is a lot of us don't have the budget, right? So that's going to be our first indicator. But we could always motivate for that. I think I jumped a little bit. Is that, of course, being in a legal team, I know that it's very hard to get the wallets open to help us with fancy tools. It's not like the engineering team or the data team. But saying that, it's back to basics, like Lucia and Kathrin mentioned, when we focus on the problem, right? There are a lot of tools out there, and just like you said, Marc, like everybody has the perfect tool and it's going to fix all our problems, and life is going to be so easy as soon as we get one or all of them. But I think for me, when I've approached the market looking for solutions, I often have to go back to the drawing board and really hone in on what the core requirements are. And again, looking at what the problem is. And again, like the other ladies mentioned, really looking at those pain points. And I like to use almost an RFP process where I weight those problems because no problem is equal. And then looking at what the most important is, where we're going to have the most impact, where we're going to have the most return on investment, that really drives that solution. Beyond that, like I mentioned, budget constraints are often really important. Sometimes it really should be the first thing that we speak about before we go to the market. But very many of us work for tech companies, for startups, we have contact with engineers and internal systems that actually can help us build solutions, whether it's just on an interim basis, it can be super basic. So often I have found myself going back internally and looking at the resources that we already have and whether we can source that internally, or if we already have a tool that maybe another team is using that we can also leverage in whatever limited or expanded way that also suits our solution. So it doesn't always have to be going to the market, finding something new. And very often those tools have such a broad spectrum of features and capabilities that it can be too much for your pain point. A tool that can do everything probably can't do everything very well. So yeah, back to the original, just focusing on that those pain points and what the problem is and focusing on solving that.
Great points. And Lucia, I know you feel strongly about this one.
Yeah, I do. I mean, tech is very powerful. We all know that, and it's changing the game. But there's so many legal challenges that are fundamentally about people, process, and data. And people often forget that. We used to call it the magic triangle without data, and then data became so big we had to bring it in, and now it's a square, I guess. But you have to think about those other elements absolutely and how they can impact a solution. I mean, if you think about it, tech can amplify a good process, right? But it can't fix fundamentally broken processes. So it reminds me of this a consulting project that we worked on a few years ago with the Department of Justice, where we had a lady that used to work in the mailroom, and she used to basically take all the incoming paper mail for, you know, the judges and etc. and everyone that worked in the court, and she used to go with her trolley and hand out the mail into everyone's inboxes on their desks. And when email got implemented, she got a little computer, she got given a computer, and she started receiving notices that had to go out to all the judges. And instead of emailing it on to the judges, she used to print them and put them in her stack and then put the hard copies in the inboxes. So she just kept going with, you know, what her original mandate was, not really thinking about how things needed to change. And we came on board to drive process improvement throughout the court system and the process. And then I had an interview with her just to understand, what do you do every day? And, you know, and I realized that notification was being emailed to all the judges already. So she was doing something that took a large portion of her day that actually wasn't needed anymore. And so, you know, fundamentally, if you're just applying technology and you're not looking at the underlying work and the processes and people, what they're doing, organizational culture, the data, then you're missing a trick. So I think the human element, adoption, change management, ongoing support, that's actually more critical than the tech itself. And sometimes the best solution is training. Sometimes it's clearer communication. Sometimes it's changing how teams are structured and changing people's roles and their responsibilities and what they're doing day to day. But I've found overall that the most successful solutions are often combine technology with something else, process improvement or cultural changes.
That makes sense. I think in my mind, from being a consultant before, it's like the people and process, reviewing and refining that. You're then allowing the tech to amplify the gain that you've made from those efficiencies earlier on. And yeah, like you say, you can't automate a bad process. And Kathrin, any thoughts?
Yeah, one of my biggest pet peeves with legal tech vendors is that they overpromise ridiculously in their sales presentations. If you attend a sales pitch with them, it usually seems like this solution is the answer to all of your problems, even the problems you didn't think you'd have. And that is brilliant, and I understand why they're doing it. But you then have in my position, you sometimes then have to deal with a team of overexcited lawyers who really think this is now the one thing that fixes our problem, and that's going to make life incredibly easy for us. And it's hard then to kind of put a pin in it and scale it back to what Lucia said, the people and processes. That there is no thought, I feel, put into the fact how a team structure might have to change with the demands of technology. If I have a very top-heavy team, for example, the solution might be to first see if there are any juniors you need to get in to do the work, instead of fully replacing it by technology, which might be an option, but might not be the best option in this case. It's also not an easy solution to just say we're going to replace people by technology, because who is there to train said technology and train the rest of the users? And then on that training aspect, except for the great sales pitch, I'd say it's important to also look for a true partner in your legal tech vendor to make sure you've got that training piece in place, because it doesn't stop with implementation. It doesn't stop with the buying decision. This is now a journey everyone is on for the next months and years, and you'd want to make sure that you can stay aware of everything that's happening with the product, that you can adapt your processes, and going back to Tanisha's earlier point, that if another problem comes up in a different team, for example, you might be able to solve that with something that you already have in your existent tech stack, instead of immediately going out to market and buying the next big shiny thing. It's so important that we know what our tech is capable of doing, and we have those good relationships with our vendors to know what updates are coming our way. And then choosing a solution for our problem might not be the one great thing that we get promised on LinkedIn or at a conference, but it might be something that we already have that can get us, let's say, at least 70% of the way. And that might be enough for now. And we can tackle those missing 30% in a few months' time, in a few years' time, when something else that really fits our requirement list comes along.
That makes sense. I think my next question is a bit more skills based. So naturally, even on the panel, you're all working in different organizations of different sizes. And I think even if you were all of equal size, undoubtedly, maybe you would have different cultures internally, different values. And I think that makes it perhaps a case where any legal ops person needs to remain adaptable to the culture and size and values of the company, and ambitions, I suppose, of the company as well. So how do you, like, I suppose, which skills do you need to remain adaptable to things like that? Because undoubtedly people will move around within their careers, and I think although you have a solution that maybe works for one size, maybe it doesn't work for another. Like how do you make sure that you keep the, well, I suppose, which skills are truly beneficial for remaining adaptable? And maybe I'll start with Lucia.
Such a great question. It comes up a lot in a lot of the summits and conferences that I attend, because I think people are so desperate. They understand technology is going to change the game, but it's how do the humans now adapt? So the first two are not going to come as a surprise. Creativity and curiosity are absolutely vital. If you're not using your creative brain and being curious about things, I think it's going to be very difficult to understand different business models and organizational cultures and how the tech fits in. At Weber Wentzel, we actually brought in an external creativity consultant to do workshops with our lawyers to try and teach them how to be creative. So creativity is an interesting kind of skill in that we tend to lose it as we get older, generally, unless you are an artist and that's kind of your career. But as kids, if you think about children, they are like intuitively very creative in the way that they go about things, and then sometime along the line we lose that, and it's just trying to like reconnect with that creative self and be able to maintain that skill in your thinking and in your day-to-day, even in a more technical profession. So we encourage our lawyers to be creative in their hobbies. So, do an art class, do something outside of your normal day that allows you to be creative. And then I can't ignore your analytical skills. Being able to break down complex problems is still very pivotal. Communication is really, really important, especially with some of the up and coming new careers that are forming in law, like legal engineers and legal analysts. That communication skill is absolutely vital. System thinking is also important. So understanding how changes in one area affects another area. Project management skills. If I could tell anyone to, do a short course online on something that will accelerate your career, in legal, especially in legal tech and legal ops, it would be project management. It really teaches you some really foundational skills. Staying on top of industry trends. A lot of people forget about that. Just, making sure that you're knowing what's out there, and obviously maintaining a healthy skepticism about new technologies, because there is no silver bullet. And then one really important one comes back to people. So building strong relationships, maintaining your networks, both within and externally in your organization, so that you can learn from others' experiences and stay informed about best practices.
Thanks, Lucia. I guess on your creativity point, I'm going to hit you with a curveball, I'm afraid. Why do you think people lose creativity? Do you think it's people find the need to conform, or they don't want to put kind of far out ideas out there in case it gets rejected, or why do you think we lose it?
I think it's got a lot to do with our school system, to be honest with you. I find that when kids are younger, play is very much an integral part of learning. And then we get these really structured schooling systems that play element is lost. And a lot of the time it takes out the creativity element in the learning. So it gets them to like parrot fashion, learn from books and recite things, and instead of actually using that creative brain. So I think the culprit, I'm going to say, is the schooling system, because I've noticed with people that are homeschooled, kids that are homeschooled, or are in alternative schooling systems like the Waldorfs and those kinds of schooling systems, that where they bring creativity into the learning and play into the learning very consciously, that those kids end up being adults that are still able to be very creative thinkers. So that's my take on it.
Okay, that's good. And maybe if I draw back again and go back to the skills question, Tanisha, maybe.
I lost the mute button. I think Lucia covered it really, really well. Curiosity, I think, is a great starting point. I think that it's funny, actually. Obviously, Lucia mentioned the creativity. I think a lot of people don't think that lawyers can be creative, which I've always taken exception to, because I think although we have this formal training and it's very structured, particularly if you want to be a litigation lawyer, I think you have to be quite creative with your argument. But I think that we can do both. And I think that lawyers are perfectly positioned to be curious, to continue learning, to be creative with the solutions that we find for our clients or our internal business problems. And this whole new world has really opened up for us, that we have to be willing to explore and willing to find innovative solutions, because the old solutions just aren't working anymore. So that's number one. And then I recently gave a talk actually about the T-shaped lawyer. So if anybody on the call is not familiar with it, the T-shaped lawyer is basically a model that was adapted from the I-shape for business professionals, where instead of having a single focus on our deep core knowledge, so being our legal expertise, we also have a layer on the top, which is non-legal skills and competencies. So I deeply resonate with this model. I think that a lot of our value is now coming from the horizontal bar. But saying that, I do think that with all the hype around tech and AI and changing the way that we position our services, the focus has shifted a little bit too much, and the T is tending to be a little bit top heavy. So I'd like to say that we also need to still remain focused, specifically if you are a lawyer, to remember that our legal expertise are really, really important and is actually the legal foundation. But building on that is also really important in the climate that we find ourselves in, and expanding our knowledge. Yes, Lucia, the O-shaped lawyer is also a really good one. I recently also saw a new model called the Delta model, So there are very many ways to be a good or better lawyer, which I think that we should be exploring.
Excellent. And thanks, Lucia, for putting the links in the chat there. And to round us off, Kathrin, what are your thoughts on skills for adaptability?
Yeah, I think both Tanisha and Lucia have laid it out brilliantly. One thing I would add is next to creativity, which I agree is something we seem to kind of lose the more we get sucked into our working life. But the other one I'd say is to be brave enough to fail. I think that one is a really big one, especially if you're working with new technology, if you're working with new processes. It is very likely that the first try isn't going to be a full success, or not a success at all. And I think we need to be brave enough to acknowledge when we have failed and then just go back to the drawing board and start again. Innovation lives through failure. This is how all the great things come about. And I think this is something that in our work life and in our career, we sometimes are a bit too maybe embarrassed to admit that we failed, and instead people tend to cover up failures or just move on, whereas the opportunity to learn from that and to improve is huge. And we just be open enough to say, well, I failed and this is what I'm taking away from it.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. And for the last question of the day, I will come back to that. I guess my next question, maybe I'll start with Lucia again. It's kind of the $1 million question, maybe. So if a tech solution is required, how do you find the right one?
Yeah, oh my gosh, it's an absolute minefield. Again, I'm going to start with what I said earlier, defining your requirements or getting clear requirements specification, and not just the features, as everyone likes to see, but the outcomes you actually want to achieve, and making sure that you understand what are the outcomes, what am I looking to achieve here. And then evaluating the tool with the entire technology ecosystem in mind. So you're considering your integration requirements with existing systems like your document management systems really early in the process. Don't think about that once you like halfway through implementation, because believe me, that can be a bit of a nightmare. And then researching your vendors very thoroughly. And again, I know it's challenging. I use a fantastic resource online called Legal Tech Hub. I'll send a link to it. It is a paid resource, but it is worth every cent because it provides in-depth solution guides on different tools, know-how, and other resources that have been like gold to me, absolute gold. And they even have templates on like how to calculate ROI, how to motivate on investment to the board, really like end-to-end legal tech solutions guide. It's great. You need to think about data governance, info security, and compliance. So make sure you get those credentials from the vendors. Know how you will exit the tool right from the beginning. And I know that sounds odd, but we consider ourselves at Fusion to be like tech agnostic, and that might seem quite odd to some people because we've just like implemented Legora firm-wide and everyone goes, okay, now you're tied to Legora forever. But to be honest with you, that would be quite silly to implement one tool and then say this is the tool for the rest of my life. You need to be able to know, is that tool still performing year on year? What does their roadmap look like? Ensure that it's aligned to your use cases and it stays aligned to your use cases. Kathrin mentioned true partners. You have to make sure that those vendors have people that are going to be true partners. It really is about the people in those organizations that make all the difference. Because to be honest, some of the tools are very, very similar, have similar price, similar functionality. If you get a true partner, you can actually have some say in terms of how the product develops and how your features and your requirements get escalated and given priority over other companies. So once you've done your evaluation and you've now identified the vendor, you want to demo the tool. You want to make sure someone takes you through it end to end so you know what it does. And then actually, this might seem quite obvious, but some people don't do it, is actually request a pilot period. So make sure that you're trialing the tool on your actual data and use cases, because it can be that you're thinking it's going to be great, you've demoed it, you start using it, and somehow you've forgotten that, for example, the tool cannot process an Excel file. And you work most of your clients are financial accounting firms. You're screwed. You need to make sure you're thinking about it, trialing it out on actual data, considering the total cost of ownership. And by that, I don't mean the license fees. I mean implementation costs, the people that are implementing, training, that time for training, ongoing support, who's going to be doing that, what is the cost to the business? And then it might sound obvious again, but an implementation plan, even if it's your first time and you don't know how to do it, there's a lot of resources online in terms of legal tech implementation, how it works. Put a plan together, make sure you know what success looks like. What do we want? What percentage do we want on user adoption? Do we want to hit the lights out on 85%, or actually is 40% on this tool good enough for us? And then don't underestimate change management, because people and lawyers don't like change, I felt. It's very hard for them to change, and user adoption. So making sure that you have got the right support from the vendor on change management and user adoption. And I think that will lead to success.
That's great. Kathrin, maybe next.
I've sadly don't have the resource of the legal tech hub, so I need to go back to the traditional Google search sometimes to just look around what's out there. But yeah, making sure that it fits with the requirements list, making sure that all the integrations are being thought of. More often than not, it's just the one little piece that makes a difference in going with one vendor versus the other one. And then just making sure that this is something that users have time to feedback on. I think it's really important to keep the user in mind as well. It might be that solution A is cheaper or offers, I don't know, gets us there 80% of the way. Solution B is a bit more expensive, might only get us there 70% of the way, but user feedback is so brilliant on solution B that this is maybe something to keep in mind, especially when you want to make sure that adoption is high throughout that. Making sure that whatever solution you go with, whatever new process you go with, has full buy-in from partner level or senior level in general. If it's not being carried by the senior member of the team, it's very unlikely that it trickles down. And even if you have junior people in the team who are very, very dedicated to using that, if it's not being carried by the top, it's just going to fall down. And then making sure that everyone who has something to say gets a chance to interact with the vendors and give their input on the right solution, and making sure that the best overall score is then the one you go with.
I definitely agree with the kind of top cover one. I remember trying to implement tech from bottom up and really struggling without some input from above, I guess, from partner level. And Tanisha?
Yeah,
Your
completely echo what both Lucia and Kathrin have said. I think, of course, we've said it a few times, focusing on the problem and those core requirements, really important. I mentioned earlier just weighting those requirements, because some are more important than others. Some solutions won't have some will have too many, and creating that overall score. And I think something that Lucia mentioned that is really, really important is just looking at the bigger picture. A lot of the time we're quite narrow-minded in project implementation or project management, where we focus on, those requirements and of course finding the right tool and how we're going to roll it out. But we don't think about what happens after. right? So the real people that have to use that, how they use it, how they fit it into their current systems. If you are transitioning from an existing tool to a new tool, so people are already used to how a system might work, and now you're changing their workflows, you're adding another step in their process. So thinking about the human element of using a new tool or a new solution and how that's going to impact the end users. And then, of course, the support that you get after. I don't know, when I've previously gone to market and I've looked at tools, there were tools that definitely weren't as robust, that we ended up going with just because we had that connection with the partner. We felt like they were going to be a trusted partner, and at least they did actually follow through. But that's a really important thing, especially when it's a really big implementation. It's affecting a large portion of your business, and it's something new for you as well. If you're leading the implementation, you really want to feel like you have that support, that if there's an issue or you just don't know how something works, and to give training to your teams, it's really, really important that you have that trusted partner. I think it makes all the difference working with that kind of partner versus somebody that might have a really cool tool, has all the bells and whistles, but they disappear after the sales pitch. And that's not helpful.
Thanks. That's probably a good segue to my last question, which I suppose is a little bit more of an experience question. So I suppose, what has been all of your greatest lesson learnt from finding solutions? So I kind of maybe reading between the lines, I gather that maybe you've seen demos that haven't quite done what they should do when it come into practice. But yeah, what is your greatest lesson learned? So maybe if I start with Kathrin this time.
Apart from that, I think my greatest lesson learned was to always keep the end user in mind. I once spent significant time with my team to build out a solution, and we tried to make it work. Senior leadership was happy. They were all, it was a client-focused solution, I have to add. The client leadership on the client side was happy with it. And then the end user came into the room to see our fancy presentation, and the first thing they said was, "I don't need to look at it, I'm not going to use it." And that was quite a blow. But it showed what happens if you don't get the person who actually works with it day to day involved at a very early stage at the beginning, but as early as you can do. Because it just goes back to that people piece. It goes back to the change management piece. If you don't involve users and those impacted most by it in your selection process, into your building process, whatever route you're going down, you're very likely end up with something that might look great on paper, but will never work in real life, due to the fact that the user, the person in front of the screen, just flat out refuses to do it. And in this case, you've spent loads of money, loads of time, loads of resources for nothing. You might as well have just burned the money. And that, as I'm sure everyone here is quite aware, getting the money is a battle. So you'd rather be a bit more careful with it. And that certainly was one of the biggest lessons I've learned.
That's a really good one. I'll get to Lucia in a sec, but these will be the last two questions of the webinar. So I guess for the people that are attending today, if you did have questions, maybe it's worth putting them in the chat. And then when we get to the end, we can hopefully go through them together. So Lucia, your biggest lesson learned?
Lessons learned is actually very similar to Kathrin's. It's the stakeholder alignment. You can. So basically, what the lesson is: trial your solution end to end with the sample data sets, and provide your provisional deliverable or output to your stakeholder to make sure that it aligns with their expectation and their requirements. Just that's the simplest thing before going the whole hog and, you know, putting everything in and finishing the work. We once also implemented a brilliant workflow system that included like geared resourcing, project manager, legal engineer, legal analysts, 3 different tools in the workflow. Looked amazing on paper, but we missed the mark completely because we didn't go back to the client to check that it was meeting their expectations. So now I make sure that all my affected stakeholders are involved right from the beginning, not just consulted at the end. And actually, often when it's an urgent piece of work, I ask them for an hour of their time. I share my screen and I play around with them on a call. And I say, okay, let's try this with this tool. Let's do that. Is this what you're looking for? Is this the output you want? Okay, so this is how the system is going to export the data. Is this going to work for you? And we talk through it live. And actually, that's quite nice. Again, love collaborating in that way because you have different brains in the room, different experience in the room, and they can get an alignment really quickly. And they can say, okay, listen, it's not quite what we're expecting. We actually wanted it in this format, but we can transfer it from Excel to Word. So we're happy. So just that alignment is really, really important. Holding their hand through it, making sure they understand what to expect from the tools, because unfortunately, South Africa is still quite immature in its legal tech ecosystem. And so you do get some lawyers that still think it's a silver bullet, like literally, oh, I thought it was like a big go button that you just push and it's the Gen AI does it all. And it's like, no, it actually needs a big team of people to be processing the data and doing the analytics and feeding back to the Gen AI and validating the output. And, you know, it's you have to manage those expectations. So yeah, that's it from me.
Thanks. And Tanisha?
Thanks, Mark. Lucia, I promise you it's beyond South Africa. It's everywhere. But I knew your accent sounded quite familiar. So very, very similar to both ladies. I think that definitely my lesson learned is getting that stakeholder buy-in, but you have to have buy-in from the top because it filters down from the top. We can't expect our users, like especially from an in-house context, most of the users of the solutions that we would roll out are more junior levels, right? And if legal is asking you to do anything, half the time it's not going to get done. So getting that leadership support from the very beginning, beyond just an approval line, but actively pushing the solution that you're trying to drive is really, really helpful. And like we've mentioned, just focusing on the people. So change management is probably the most important piece for me that I've learned in failures, because a process or a solution is only as good as the people that use it, or if people use it at all. So really investing time upfront, whether that's in training or rolling out a solution in a very intentional, staggered way, so that you might not have 100% use right away, or you might not be seeing the full capability of a specific solution. But if you really, do your implementation in an intentional way, and on smaller chunks, I find that people tend to be more receptive rather than this whole big change all at once. So really knowing your audience and catering to that can go a long way.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I guess we've come to the end of the questions, for me at least. But we do have a question in the chat that I think might round us off, given the time on the clock. So this one's from Sarah. You putting your hand up because you're the one that's going to take it. Okay. Let me say it first, and then I'll open it up. So in a world where we are constantly tasked with doing more with less, moving dynamically and given the ever increasing workloads, how do you encourage legal professionals to accept being wrong sometimes, that mistakes will happen, and eventually enjoy or celebrate failure as part of the process? So I go Lucia, and then Kathrin, and then Tanisha, if you want to add after that.
Yeah, I had to put my hand up because I wasn't in legal right out of law school. I actually had another career and then came into legal fairly late, and it was quite shocking to me how kind of averse lawyers were to making mistakes. And again, it goes to my comment earlier about them largely being A-type personalities that are attracted to law, well, in my view anyway. So it's like really getting your head around that, the perfectionist trap, that they don't give themselves much leeway. So they're under pressure, all the time from clients, and there's this general impression that lawyers just don't can't get anything wrong, don't mess up, have to be perfect. So for me, it was more reframing that failure as learning, so accepting that mistakes are inevitable and transforming that fear of making mistakes into a growth experience. Like Kathrin said earlier, embrace the mistakes, learn from the experience. What I've seen in practice with teams is that it really builds resilience. Once you can accept it, and it's also about creating a culture of trust in teams and in firms. So often, if there's no inherent trust, then people are very scared to make mistakes and to get blamed, and they're afraid of the consequences. So that trust element, in my mind, comes from the top. If there's a culture of learning and failing, and growing and being resilient within the firm right from the top, it tends to go down to all layers, and people feel safe enough then to fail.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Kathrin?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with what Lucia has said. And one thing I'd like to add, and this is something I need to tell myself as well, on quite a regular basis. We are not doing open heart surgery. So I think we would sometimes be good to remind ourselves on the fact that while the work we're doing is important, I'm not trying to diminish that one bit, but we are not out here saving lives and working, as I've said, on open heart surgery. Sometimes thinking about the fact that in the grand scheme of things, failing at work is not the end of the world. We can come back from that, and just reminding ourselves of our own importance in this whole thing is a good thing. Something, as Tanisha said, saving PDFs, not lives, is a very good one. I'm actually going to put that up on my desk. It is very true, and I think we get so caught up into the reality, or in the daily rut and the reality of our work, that we sometimes forget it is important what we do. It's great what we do, but it is not the most important thing in the world, neither in the world as a whole, but also not in our lives. It is, at the end of the day, just work, and we can come back from any failure there.
For sure. I'm really sorry, Tanisha. We're at the hour. But for those that joined today, and I guess for the people that watch this afterwards, I hope you enjoyed this session, going through how to find the right solution, whether it's a tech one or a non-tech one, with a little bit of experience in there as well, anecdotes from lessons learned over the panel's careers. So a big thank you to Kathrin, to Lucia, to Tanisha. I really enjoyed that, and I hope everyone else did as well. And yeah, the next one should be next month. Just watch this space, and see you there. Thanks everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye.